Okay, so let's start with the whole issue of, sorry for all the delays, but let's get ourselves going. Let's start with the issue of just basically putting those windows in and see if we get a little bit of control on that relative to things, and then we'll go ahead and add some more things in here in terms of the floors and all that. So basically, it all started with this notion of basically putting the walls down. And again, we can put all sorts of walls in there, including, actually, I should probably just go ahead and open up that one. Well, we can open up the template that we have or just use some of the existing ones. But again, in the template, where if you open the template that we provided at the starting point, you can see that there were actually some wall types in there that are for like a wood frame wall that has either stucco or has siding, things like that. Actually has some nice fill patterns mapped to the outside of it, so it looks pretty appropriate. So let me go ahead and just start creating some architectural walls so we get a sense of how this works. Again, that's being so incredibly slow right now that it's just paining me to watch. So I'm going to open it up on the Mac side too to see if it's going to have any better luck over here. Okay, let's get started. We'll try and see how this works. Okay, so we're going to go through and choose one of the wall types. For example, I'll just do the brick on metal stud, kind of one of the relatively thick wall assemblies. And the idea is when I go through and draw, again, what I should probably do, as opposed to just sort of drawing it, is always make sure that I'm choosing the appropriate height constraint. So I'm going to choose it up to level 2 as opposed to going up to 20 feet. And I will go ahead and start drawing my wall. Again, I'm not going to be all that careful about as I first place the walls, making sure I have precise dimensions. But just go ahead and start drawing them. And that is, again, being so slow. I'm going to really wonder about what it's up to. Okay, when I hit the corner and I get the inference point, I can go ahead and close that on up, and it looks pretty good. Now, just as you're placing things, good things to know about, you actually have these 4 little markers, which are the elevation markers. If you put your drawing within the center of all those, what will happen is when you look at the initial elevations, they'll appear in the elevations. Each of these are elevation markers. If you actually look at the head, you can sort of see where the cut line is for the elevation. So if you stay within those boundaries, you're initially there. Not to worry if you put it outside of those boundaries, because we can go ahead and move where the cut planes are, but that's sort of the initial box where if you can get your building within there, you're in pretty good shape. Now, as you go through and you do your building, notice again that it is not showing all the different layers. The reason it's not showing the layers is the level of detail for this particular drawing is set to a coarse level of detail, so minimize the amount of graphical information to draw more quickly. And if I choose either medium or fine, you'll see that you actually can then get the more detailed information. So then it'll show the precise layering of the walls, and you can start to see everything that's going to be happening inside the walls as they join. I often go through, and it's just strictly a matter of choice. I'll often shade that also, just because I like the color information to kind of help me sort out what's going on. So as I go through and put in like interior walls, choosing the wall, I'll choose an interior wall type as to one of these exterior ones. They had some interior partitions. And those are a little bit simpler as assemblies go. But let me go ahead and put an interior wall in here in the corner. The important thing I want you to notice about what's happening with the walls here is, it is actually going ahead and healing at the corners. So at the point where the studs join the studs and the sheetrock wraps around, it actually is doing the appropriate thing. And the materials are actually melding together. They're actually joining based on, if you have 2 adjacent materials that are coming together and do join, and it's the same material, it'll go through and actually will join between them. Now, it's a little hard to tell because the line weights are actually so high here that you can't really see the chipboard layer. This is sort of a view where we're looking at things with, these are the line weights, the way they're going to appear when they're actually plotted. So it's very common convention to have heavier lines at the outside and then kind of thinner lines separating the layers. As you're working and doing your design, however, that may be a little inconvenient or maybe hiding information from you. So you can turn on something called thin line view, where as opposed to representing all the line weights accurately for plotting, it will show them all as very thin 1 pixel. Okay. And let me show you where that is. If you want to do that, it is under the View tab. You'll find there's something called the thin line mode. If you choose thin line mode, TL as the shortcut. So see, actually, it just thins out all the lines, so now you can actually see the sheetrock coming around and melding and all the points. So that's just, yeah, as you're working, if you need the fine control and the thickness of the lines is actually bothering you, watch out for that. Actually, this may be important as we're trying to align those windows precisely too. So let me zoom on out. I'm going to go ZO, ZO to zoom on out, or I could do that with the steering wheel. Let's talk about these windows. Now, for placing the windows in there, again, I'll go to the Architecture tab, and I'll grab some windows using the Window tool. It has those windows that are already in there that are pretty boring, just those fixed windows. I think in the template that we gave to you, there's some more interesting ones with some awning windows, there's some fixed windows, I think there's some double hungs, there's some different windows in there. But if you need to load some new window types, always go to the library. And this is where, if you don't have a library, this is where I'd say that you need to go and borrow the USB drive and go ahead and copy them down to your machine. But if you don't have the library, if this doesn't open up, then you'd say you're having troubles. You want to put that in there. Hang on. Again, being too slow. I'm doing a little experiment on the other one, so to see if I can get that one to go faster. Okay, we're out to the library at long last. We will say, pull down to the Windows section. And in the Windows section, I could pull up one of these other ones, for example, like the double hung windows, something like that. Let me go ahead and bring that one in as one of the examples. You can actually bring in several different types. If you want to bring in several different types, you can actually control click to select several different things here inside of the choices. Let me even kind of bring the one without trim so we can sort of talk about that too. So I have a couple different instances in here. Yes? You certainly can. Okay, so within here, it says like Revit 2013, and just bring that on down. Okay, it's about 1 gig of fun.
Yes. I found that when I tried to copy those files over, if I just copied the whole folder across, it was looking to a different license file.
That is interesting.
So I just copied across the library and the template.
Very good.
My existing file.
Okay, that actually sounds good. So as opposed to, don't just sort of replace the whole Revit 2013 file, open that up, and then inside you'll find libraries and templates, specific subfolders. A very good tip. You were able to do that successfully to get those libraries put in?
Yeah, it kept crashing and it took like several hours, but got it in.
Okay. What you got?
What's the trade-off of importing all these families in your model? Is it going to drag everything the whole time?
It gets a little bit bigger, so it's always one of these things, go ahead and only load in the families that you need. It turns out, for example, just bringing in a couple different window families, that's not so bad, they're pretty lightweight. The one to watch out for is when we actually start doing structural modeling, don't bring in the entire steel catalog, okay, because that's an awful lot of shapes. But 4 or 5 things, that's okay. It's really out of time, yeah. But it's really always, it's just a question of how much memory it's taking up. Okay, and I'll slow it down a little bit. Okay, so let's see what I got here over in my menu now. In my type selector, I have fixed, I have double hung, I have double hung with trim. Let's just go ahead and put some of these in and start talking about control. So when I go through and choose one of the sizes, like 24 by 72, you're going to see that, for example, one of the choices you have is this notion of the head height and seal height. As you're placing them, you can go ahead and set that in advance so you can change it after the fact. But if you know, for example, that your windows want to be 6'8" as opposed to 7 feet, and again, that's just sort of an architectural choice, you can put it in there. Notice as I'm placing it in here, I can't place a window just out in the middle of space. I actually have to place it in the walls. This happens with a lot of different library components. If I'm in the zone where it wouldn't make sense to place it, this is a little no can do symbol. But if you actually get it over a relevant host, okay, or a host that'll accept it, it'll then put it in there. Now with windows, again, the key is if you want to keep the insides and the outsides right, go ahead and always sort of like push to the outside, click to the outside of the center. Okay, and that'll put the exterior of the window right there. And I'll put another one right here. And another one right here. Now, we're placing windows in there. They're looking okay in terms of the floor plan view. They'll look okay in terms of the 3D view too. Let's take a look at the windows. In terms of the windows here, there are some parameters that control it. Like these are instance parameters because each and every one of these windows is an instance of a window and they're all independent. So I can control the height independently in terms of that. But when it comes time to actually control some parameters that define the shape, we can edit the type. And anything we do that edits the type will actually change all of the windows of the same type. Let's think about what some of the choices are. For this window, which doesn't have much trim, it's pretty much just the height and width, the default, it's not so height. There's an interesting one here called window inset. Think about that. Window inset is actually the notion of how far back the glass pushes. And these windows currently are set to only be 3/4. The glass is pretty much out of the surface. If you go around on the Stanford campus and you look at all the big windows in the big thick walls, we use different things. Sometimes we push the glass way out to the outside. Another thing we very often do is, though, we'll inset the glass a little bit. So for example, if I push that back, on the Stanford campus where you have very thick walls, it may be a foot, it may be a 1.5 feet to really match the thickness of the wall. Often we keep the glass on the inside, but you can inset things. When you say you want to inset them, you see actually this part is actually adapting and kind of pushing the glass on back. So again, that's one of those things where you use a part, you can go ahead and kind of change the parameters that describe this part and have that affect all the different ones, all the different components that use 24/72. If, on the other hand, you want to have some windows where the glass is at the surface, and other windows where the glass is back in recessed, then what we can do is actually duplicate it and have two different versions. One that has the parameters set so it's at the outside, and one that has it pushed back. So always think about how you want to use these things. Whenever you're making changes, think about, is this a change I want to have affect everything that I've already replaced? Or is this something where I want to create a new instance and only have it affect things forward? Okay, so we got the window inset. The other thing we'll talk about relative to windows is this notion of really aligning them, spacing them, and stuff like that. Because here the windows are kind of hanging out, they're sort of separate from each other. I can go ahead and just try pushing them back and forth. I can also just kind of clicking on them, and you can sort of see I can say what the offset is between them. So right now it's about 3 feet. It's a 24-inch window, so there's a little bit of a gap in between there. So how can you close that gap if you actually want to mold them together? You can't just go ahead and say, oh, make that 2'0" and kind of bring them together. And that'll work if you want to control it numerically. Let me undo that, though, and show you probably a better way to do that. With the windows, and really with all the elements, there's this funny notion that every once in a while, you want to line things up perfectly. And I really want to control the fact that, oh, your left side is my right side, or really just have things butt right up against each other. Okay. And if we want to do that, there's a really great tool available to us when we have selected an object. Let me go ahead and select one of the windows. And when we select something, a modify menu pops up, or a modify ribbon, which will then include some tools. For example, one of the tools we have available is the Align tool. And here's how the Align tool works. The Align tool can do this. It lets you say, hey, I want to take this edge of the window here and basically pull things to it to match that edge. And we can lock them in place if you want to. So a really good way to align things or to pull windows together is like this. I'll grab the Align tool. What I'll do is I'll find the edge that I want to choose. So I could choose some sort of inside edge like that, but it really probably makes more sense to be the outside edge right there. So it's always choose a location, and then I choose some other edge that I want to pull to it. So it's always here, then pull you to me. It's always set the location and then pull things to the location. Now, with those two windows butted together, you'll see that actually it says, ooh, okay, that was kind of interesting. You seem like you liked that as an intentional thing. would you like me to lock it so that's always honored? That way if I move one of the windows, they're going to move together. And if you want to turn on the lock, that's cool. If you want to keep them separate, that's okay too. But if you really want to think of those as joined windows, try locking them together. So, same sort of thing here. I can now take this window and pull that to it. So I'll go over here and grab it. I'll grab this edge over here and lock it to it. Okay, so now I have 3 windows that are all molded together. And the nice thing about this now is, if I go through and move any of them, okay, they all move together. Because you have defined that the constraint you want to honor is always having those strings locked together as a single unit. Yeah?
Can you align them with an offset so that they've moved together but they're offset by a certain amount?
Then I would do it a little bit differently. A very good question. If you want to align them with a little bit of an offset, what I'll do is as follows. Okay, I'll put some windows in. Here's what you want to do. Okay. When you put a window in like this, okay, notice it has this funny little dimension. It says 2'9" from here to here. Okay. What you really want to do is, okay, basically say what the dimension is. And I can either do it center to center, or I can move it so it's edge to edge. But I'll make those like 2'6" apart from each other. Okay. And now you basically want to establish a relationship between them. Okay, there's a couple ways I could do this. Let me try something really quickie, and then I'll do it the right way. No, that's not the way I want to do it. Okay. Here's how you would do that. If you want to go ahead and have a relationship between things that's really controlled by a distance, what you really want to do is actually put a dimension in and lock the dimension. So let me show you how that would work. I got these 2 windows. They're about 6 inches apart from each other. So let's talk about what we can do. If I want to keep them about 6 inches apart from each other, I would love to put a dimension in here that will lock that relationship. And where do you find dimensions? Are under the Annotate tab. I'll put that back on 3 also. Since we seem to be working okay now. Okay, so what I can do is go to the Annotate tab. Under Annotations, you'll find all the things like dimensions, text, callouts, things that we use to annotate and enhance our drawings. But dimensions are actually good because they can have a behavior on the model too. So what I can do is say, okay, I'm going to grab a dimension. I'll do what's called an align dimension. A line dimension will actually follow along the path between the 2 points as opposed to always being perpendicular. So for a straight wall, it doesn't matter so much. It matters more in the context of a kind of a wall, which is sort of sloping. But we can decide which dimension we want to lock. We can lock the center-to-center dimension, or we can lock the kind of edge-to-edge dimension. Either one of those will work, and it's going to turn out to have about the same effect. But if I want to do that, well, I take that back. As long as it would have the same effect as long as the windows stayed the same. If we change the size of the window, then they would have 2 different effects, because it's the matter whether you're maintaining the cushion or whether you're kind of keeping the same center-to-center distance. So let's do center-to-center for now. I'll say center this window to center that window. I now have a dimension. I can put it out there. Now, the cool thing about dimensions, or what you have to know about dimensions, is dimensions are sort of, well, they kind of work 2 ways. As you put dimension in, we'll practice some more putting dimensions in here in just a second. As you put dimensions in, it's recording the distance, okay? But it can also drive the distance. So for example, if you go through and click on that window, notice that the dimension goes from being a big black piece of text to actually a little blue kind of enterable dimension. So I can say, hey, I want that to be 2'9", and have it drive the behavior. Now, with dimensions also, if you want to go through and start locking a dimension, what you do is actually just choose the dimension line. So I'll choose that line right there. Okay, and notice that a little lock glyph shows up here. If I want to lock that dimension, what I do is I close the lock. And the nice thing now is, since that is locked to be 2'9" apart from each other, if I slide this, it's going to be maintaining that cushion. Okay, so why don't you try that? how about if everyone just somewhere in your drawing, doesn't really matter kind of where you're doing exactly, but see if you get two different windows that are close to each other and see if you get a dimension going from center line to center line. Kind of put it out there, and then we'll go ahead and try locking that dimension. So I'll do the same thing over here. I'll do it on the front here. I'll grab a window. Let me go ahead and put a window here. I'll put one over here. I got 3 of them there. So I could try aligning those, or I can go through and put a dimension. To put a dimension, again, what I do is I go to the Annotate tab. And once I'm on the Annotate tab, I am ready to basically grab one of the dimensioning tools. I'll use the Align dimension. And all I'm going to do is, for dimensioning, it works like this. You go ahead and find the point of interest. In this case, it's the center line. I'm going to click on another point of interest and another point of interest. Boy, I actually got them evenly spaced. Dumb luck. Okay, what'll happen is after you click on points of interest, if you then click out into what I'll call just space in the drawing area, but you don't actually click on a valid object, you're just clicking on white space. Okay, it'll interpret that as being, oh, you want to place the dimension now. So now I have these 2 different dimensions. Actually, they're independent. I can block either or both. Let me lock them both. Okay, and now I have these 2 windows that are, they're always going to stay that 4-foot relationship. Okay, so let's just stop there and kind of pick up some dimension questions. Yes?
Is there a way, if you don't actually want to show the dimensions, you just want to set those distances?
What you end up having to do is just hide the dimension. So what you do is, if you don't want to see it anymore, click it. And oh, I'm trying to remember. There should be something where you actually don't even see it at all. What I always do is right-click it, and I say hide it in the view. So I can hide that element. Another way to do it is if you just don't want to see the dimension. That is what I would do if I want to see some dimensions, but I want to hide other ones. Okay. I can also just turn off all the dimensions. Okay, but let me go ahead and just hide that one specific element. Yeah, you want there to be a checkbox where you can just say, make this one visible or not visible. Or what you're going to start learning, we'll start having these sort of funny things where we have different classes of dimensions. Yeah, and you can set that up too. But it's not set up that way out of the box, but you can start setting it up in your template that way. Another question over here? Can I show you another kind of cool variation on this? Okay. You got 3 windows, that was looking pretty good. Okay, what about 4 windows or 5 windows? You look at Y2E2 and you go all the way across, there's probably 25 windows that are across there. And if you put them all in there, that might take a long time to go through and do. So let's kind of show you some variations. And this is all just good, useful editing stuff. We're showing you it in the context of windows, but this is going to work the same whether you're replacing furniture or chairs in an auditorium or whatever. It's the same basic principle. So I'm going to go ahead and put some windows out here on the front of the building here on this side. I got 4 of them. And I'm actually pretty, it doesn't look like they're not quite even, which is probably a good thing. I've been having too good a luck in terms of putting them in there. But if we now go ahead and zoom in on the front of the building there, okay, and I go through and I say, hey, I got 4 windows there, I'd like those to all be evenly spaced. Let me show you how you can do that. We'll say, okay, let's go to the annotations and we'll grab those dimensions. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Drop it out here. Now, we can go through and kind of start messing around with these things and get them evenly spaced. I happen to have them fairly evenly spaced, so you don't really kind of see much of a difference here. But the nice thing about string dimensions is that you can actually do this. You have those little locking grips. Those little guys are basically saying, hey, I'd like to lock it down and maintain these dimensions. We also have this guy. This guy's over here. This guy is the equality constraint. And what's the equality constraint for? If you go ahead and click on the equality, it'll go through and space things out evenly. Okay, so what you're saying is because you have a big old string dimension, you want those to be evenly spaced between those different things. Okay, now, That's kind of groovy in its own right. I don't have to do the math and figure out that it's 4'9" or 4'8.5", whatever it is, stuff like that. And that kind of works out okay. But it's even cooler that it is a constraint that'll maintain itself. So for example, if I go through and move the windows in, okay, it'll always maintain that equality. So no matter what you do, okay, it's always going to make sure that spacing is even. Okay, based on the motion. So if I pull the in one in, it'll squish them in. If I pull the second one out, it'll space them all out. It's kind of like having all these things that are just locked to each other given this relationship. Yes?
So is there a way for it to be showing the dimension though instead of the EQ then?
I think at that point, instead, that's actually a good question. Equality display, equality text, what else did it say? Or I could actually show the value. So that's a parameter.
Okay.
So either way we like that. What's the equality formula? It's just 12 foot spaced evenly? That kind of shows, I'm not sure that makes sense to me. Or the equality text is just the EQ symbol. Okay, now that's pretty cool unto itself, but let me give you one last variation on the sleeve. Because if you like the idea of copying and pasting and controlling links and stuff like that, for example, if we're going to put a lot of seats in the auditorium, okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let me zoom on out. You were sort of wondering about using other types of parts. We'll get ourselves a little bit out of order, but it'll work nonetheless. Let's go ahead and I'm going to load in some sort of seat. We're going to make rows of seats, something like that. Okay, and that's going to be, it's going to work very, very similar. But the only difference from your modeling standpoint between windows and seats is windows have to be hosted in walls. Seats can really be anywhere. They're like a freestanding component. We can put it anywhere on the floor. So let's show you how you do that. Under the Architecture tab, we have windows and doors. They're kind of two special purpose components. The more general purpose components is just all the components. That's where we get general things. Pieces of furniture, plumbing fixtures, all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to choose the component tool, see what's available. Looks like I have some desks in my default one. I know in the starting point that we gave you for the assignment, there's some chairs, some desks, some different things that you might want to work with there. Parking spaces, trees. It's a variety of different things out here. Okay, let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to load in. We'll go out there to the library and I'll say, okay, Mr. Library, let's go into the furniture category and see if I can find some nice sort of chair. There, like a nice little auditorium seat. Or we'll do have a task chair with arms, or what do we have here? Seating, chair, desk, bench, locker room, tablet arm. There you go. This ought to remind you of high school. Okay, remember those? We'll pull one of those in. Okay, so again, I'll bring it on in here. We'll go ahead and place it. It's loading it in right now. Okay, here's my little tablet armchair. You might see, can you see where the little tablet's facing north right now? Okay. As you go placing things, if you want to rotate it, and you can always rotate things after the fact, is as you're placing things, if you want to try different variations, the space bar will orient you, it'll switch around between like rotations. So space, 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 space. I'll kind of take you around. Let me put one of those chairs in there. So this is my new classroom. So I got my little 3D chair in there. I am now ready to start spacing them out. Okay, so if I want to create a bunch of them, let's talk about this. Let's say I wanted to create a row of like 8 or 9 of them. Here's how we can do that. Okay, we could go ahead and place. Okay. We could go ahead and use this little tool up here. There's a copy tool. The copy tool is kind of nice. It says, hey, I don't need to go back to the menu and pull another one in here. I just want this thing, and let's place a similar one. Okay, so I can copy that. And I'll put it over here. Okay, and I'll have a copy. Actually, that's very similar. If you're an AutoCAD user, that's very, very similar to copying an AutoCAD user. Choose a base point as the handle and kind of indicate what the opposite is. Okay, and that's kind of okay. We could do that. That'll work. But here's something very nice. If you like the idea of copying, but you also like the idea of having a very regular spacing, there's this whole notion of arraying. And the array tool is going to become your best friend when you do things like this. How that works is you go ahead and choose an object, for example, this object. And because we've chosen an object, we're now able to modify some different things. Okay. As we go looking around in here, in these different sort of sets of things, there's aligning, there's mirroring. The array tool is actually right over here. If I choose the array tool, it looks like those 4 little boxes, 3 of which are blue and 1 of which is dark. Here's how it works. You get to choose a couple different things. You get to choose, is it a linear array or a radial array? So do you want to go straight down a line or around a circle? Whether they should be grouped and associated. Let's talk about that. If you copy things and they're not group associated, what happens is you copy them, but once you copy them, they're pretty much, you can scatter them across the field. They're no longer related to each other. They're just placed. They're not tied together anymore. If you group and associate, the nice thing is they're actually clones of each other and their relationship is understood, so that if you change one of them, it'll change all of them. Okay, so it's more like cloning versus copying. You can say the number of them. You can also say how you want to indicate the offset. Are you going to show me the distance to the second one, or are you going to show me the last one and fill it in? And the difference is, if you go to the second one, it'll replicate the same spacing. If you do the last one, it'll take here to the end point and fill in the space. So it's really just 2 ways of looking at the same problem. So I'm going to say, go ahead and give me, 7 chairs. I'm going to say I'm going to show you the place of the last one. And then I'm going to go from here and say the last one's going to be over here. And what it'll do is fill in all the ones in between. Okay, you can change that number again. Oh, well, 7 looks a little bit squishy. What if I only fit 6 in there instead? What happened if I put 10 in there? It's looking a little bit too tight there. So you can sort of figure out about what you want. The nice thing about arrayed things is they still have that same sort of relationship between them, in that if I start moving around the endpoints, they'll all maintain that equality. So really, an array is really just a copy with an equality constraint all put in there together for you. So if I choose the array, I'll choose the last element of the array and go dragging it on down. You'll see the L went moving to respace themselves. So arrays are sort of a very handy thing to work with in terms of doing a lot of copying. Okay, again, we'll talk some more about all this stuff as we kind of keep on going. Arrays kind of a good thing. Actually, you can also do arrays of arrays, if you like that notion. So I could go ahead and take this array, and I could make an array which goes from here to the second row, and make, 5 rows. Oops. That wasn't very good. It's because I was doing to the last location. Let me spread them all out. Okay, and I have an instant classroom, something like that. So arrays is sort of another good tool to have in your bag of tricks. But enough of all that. Let's go ahead and get onto these floors and roofs, because that's what I really want to kind of go on today. What we need to kind of accomplish this morning. So any sort of questions about all this arraying and copying? It's good general stuff. Yeah, it's kind of all good editing stuff that'll apply to anything else you need to do. But we want to start thinking about just adding some more building elements to your bag of tricks. Okay, there's my classroom. Shade those all. Not looking too bad. A little bit tight. We'll make it work. California classroom. Oh my gosh. No, then there could only be 20 in there. We'd have to take some out. In terms of now of putting a floor and a roof on this place, let's go ahead and think about those. Because when you're putting floors and roofs on, it's actually a very, very simple operation. The only real big difference between floors and roofs is floors, we trace the boundary to create something, and we typically create a flat surface. Roof, we trace a boundary, but we actually start to indicate which of the different edges will have a slope to them, and out of that, it'll figure out what the overall roof shape should be based on this definition, based on the slopes. So it kind of comes that way. So let us show you how that works. There we go. Okay, floors all start with this notion of boundaries. And really, if you can think about if walls were generated by placing lines and things through those lines, floors are all done by basically tracing an outside surface, and then inside that outside boundary, a floor will be created. So let's kind of show you the kind of the simplest case of that. I'll go back to the floor plan view. It's probably easier to do over there. Let me put a floor out here that is not even inside the building. I'll just put one outside here, like a patio or something like that, as a starting point, and then we'll put one inside the building and show you the nuance. So the floor tool is up here in the architecture tab. When you choose the floor tab or the floor tool, again, we're going to get a series of different drawing tools to work with. Let's see, on my ever so slow machine, how long it takes for that to come up. There we go. Okay, here's what's going on. As we define our floors, a couple big choices. Here's the drawing tool, so I can sort of again sketch individual segments. I can go through and do a rectangle, something like that, or some sort of shape. We're going to learn how to use this tool over here, which is basically follow the walls. Since you've already placed walls, it's actually a very good place to place your floors. There's a type of floor, generic 12-inch, or we can choose a specific type of wood frame floor or a lightweight concrete floor on the metal deck, whatever the building construction is. Okay. And there's a funny notion here about extending into the core, and that will become more important to us in a minute when we start placing them on top of walls. But just in general, why don't we try just creating some sort of floor? I'll just put it outside here somewhere. I can choose, oh, what do I have here? I'm going to go for a nice wood floor with a ceramic tile finish. And what I will do is just put it outside, which wouldn't be very sensible. But I'll start drawing a boundary. And I'll go ahead and close that up. So go ahead and just make yourself some little boundary like that. And what happens is after you create the boundary, if you want to actually make it into a floor, all you have to do is finish it. You can click the little green check mark. Just click that little check mark there. It'll finish it and create a floor. And we now have a floor. You can go and take a look at that in 3D. We're doing pretty good out here. There's my floor. In fact, I could even edit these in 3D. Maybe I'll do that just to kind of show you. Okay, we can choose the type of the floor. Right now it's at level 1. The reason it's at level 1 right now is because we created it on the level 1 floor plan. It assumes that it's at that level. We can also raise it up or lower it down a little bit, give it an offset if it wants to be a few inches below or a few inches above level 1. Okay, you can choose different types. The type selector is up here. So if I want it to be a wood floor as opposed to a tile floor, you can choose different types. So very much like we can do with walls. Choose an element, choose its type, choose a window, choose its type, choose a floor, choose its type. So we go ahead and change it to different types. And we're going to find out that even these floors, they have layers to them very much like the walls do. So we can sort of specify the structural layer, the finished layer, and get all the accurate quantities that way. Now, as you're creating floors, here's the only thing you have to watch out. There's two big gotchas in terms of floors that you have to watch out for. One is as follows. Let me go ahead and edit that floor's boundary. I can choose it and say edit its boundary. That'll kind of open up the pink lines again. So this is what I always call pink line sketching mode. Okay. As you're working in pink line sketching mode, there's only a couple ways you could possibly get in trouble. One is that. Okay. As a boundary, it really does have to be a complete boundary. So if the boundary doesn't quite join, okay, it won't know how to close itself and will complain to you. So if you have something that's a sketch that's a little bit open, you say finish, you get this message. Warning, the lines must be enclosed loose. The highlighted lines are open at one end, and it may be hard to spot, but it's going to try really hard to tell you where they're open. Okay, so that's one way to get yourself in trouble. And the solution to that would be to go through and join them again. Okay, and as soon as it's joined, you'll be good. The other way you sometimes get in trouble with floors could be this, could be that, but basically you've overshot. So as opposed to undershooting, you overshot a little bit. And sometimes when you're picking walls, depending on how well your walls are joining up, you get this undershot or you get this overshot a little bit, and you have to just kind of close that loop. So again, I could go through and pull those back and make that a clean connection. But let me show you another editing tool that'll be even better for doing this. And again, if you're familiar with AutoCAD, this looks familiar to you. There's something called the trim tool. Okay, and the trim tool or extend tool, it's actually the same tool in Revit, is your friend for fixing these things. Here's how it works. So I got some lines, they're all here. I want them to sort of clean up relative to each other. The trim tool is actually right here. Okay, and when you choose the trim tool, what you're going to basically do is just basically choose the different lines you want to come against each other. Now here's the goofy thing. This almost takes, you're used to the way you used to work in AutoCAD. You have to kind of turn your thinking around backwards. The way the trim tool works in Revit is you click on the sides of the lines that you want to keep, and not the sides you want to go away. So in this example, given these choices, if I want to keep this box, what I want to do is select this one and this one. Okay, and what will happen is everything outside, those will go away. Okay. How you get in trouble sometimes is if I click on this one and this one, then you end up keeping that piece. You end up keeping the wrong piece. Let me show you what I mean. So if I click on this one and I'm clicking on this line and I'm clicking on the sides I want to keep, okay, I'll get what I want. If I click over here and I click that other line, same line, but I'm just clicking on the other side, it'll keep that side instead. So always make sure you keep the side that you want. Okay, here to here. Everything's good. Finish that up. Okay, now as you're going through and you're creating these, you create a boundary, and that's looking pretty good. You try to form a nice continuous loop. If you need to put a hole in the floor because you have a big old atrium in the middle of your building, or you have a stairway that's dropping down, or some sort of shaft you want to put through the hole, there's a number of different ways you can do that. But the simplest way, or I'll say probably the one that's the most straightforward, is you can choose that floor and edit it. And if you just put an opening inside of the boundary, so a loop within a loop, okay, it'll understand that as basically subtracting out space. So the way it works is the first loop creates form, the second loop actually subtracts form back out. Okay. I never do it, but if you want to play, a third loop will create form inside of a void, and a fourth loop will cut another hole out. So it just alternates between creating and taking out. Okay. And this is actually a really useful technique because, again, you can really easily create openings between different floors, for like a big atrium here, you can do this for a stairway. You'll find out we can do this for a roof. You want to put like a big opening in a roof over a patio or something. If we're going to put a skylight in, it probably makes sense to put a window in there. But you go through and kind of create openings like this. So go ahead and try that. Try creating some sort of floor, just a floor that's out there hanging in space right now. And we're going to show you how to put it actually inside the building. So again, the big thing is, I'm doing this in 3D. You don't have to be doing it in 3D. If it's easier for you in 2D, go ahead and go to the 2D view. Again, go to the view where you want to create it. You say that you want to use the floor tool. And you start sketching. I'll go ahead and create a floor over here. If I want it to have some sort of rounded edge, I can go ahead and choose some arcing tool. Experiment with the arc shape. But as soon as I have something that looks like a nice complete edge, I'll finish it. Can I have a floor? And that's really all there is to it, is really just kind of creating that boundary. Okay, so that part was pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little bit interesting that you have to think about it is when you put that on the building, it's really the notion of where the boundary should be. That's where it gets sort of interesting. Let's talk about that. Yes?
I guess I'm sure everything is, all the options are grayed out.
Okay, let's take a look. It probably means we're in the middle of some mode. Oh, so what's happening? Okay, what's happening for you is we've drawn the boundary. Okay, it's there. We're on the Home tab right now, but actually watch out for this. See that one's green? Click on that one. It'll take you to the tab that actually has the tool that's relevant for you. So whenever you have that green mode, it means you're sort of in the middle of something. When you say finish it, okay, then you'll be back into, so when you're in drawing mode, it kind of locks you up. How are we doing on those basic floors? You got some basic floors out there? If you got some basic floors, let's talk about the next thing you want to know, which is really getting the floor within the building properly. And here's what that looks like. Oh, what is it? Creating new floor types, that's okay. That's going to be very much like wall types. We'll sort of do that more a little bit later. That's not good. The whole file server seems to go away. Okay, we'll figure that out in a minute. Let's talk about over here on this building, how we put a floor under it. Here's the deal. As you go ahead and think about your walls, and often your walls have multiple layers to them. They might have an interior layer, they might have some nice exterior shingles or something like that up here. Maybe some sheathing in there in terms of separating it all. Yeah, the way this is actually framed up, we typically have some sort of like a sill plate and some top plates. But as we think about the floor, there's this whole issue of really how to actually take the floor and place it relative to the walls. And here's the deal. If you go through and put the floor in, and you have the floor actually go to the outside surface of the wall, the problem is when you go through and have a multi-story structure, or even for a single-story structure, you know, we typically have the floor hanging out further than the structural core, and it's exposed on the outside, and that creates a problem because you really don't want a floor that does something like that. What happens is we have like sort of a waterproofing and flashing detail there that we have to work with. Water sort of gets under here and wicks in and starts to kind of create a rot problem for you. You tend not to actually have floors run out to the outside surface. What we tend to do with floors is we won't run them to the outside, we'll actually stop them at the edge of the structural core. So if you think about this in terms of how a house is typically constructed, there'll typically be a rim joist here, some sort of plywood here. Even this will be sitting on some sort of sill plate, and there'll be some sort of concrete foundation underneath it. But we always run the floor, it's not out to the outside surface. We tend to hold it to the edge of the core instead. Okay, and that's such a common operation that even in Revit, that's one of the choices that's really easy to turn on. So if I go back and I say, hey, let's go back here to make a floor, and I choose my wall type, that's fine. One of the choices in here is extend into the wall to the core, okay? And the idea there is, let's go ahead, as opposed to drawing this time, use this tool over here. This is called the pick wall tool. So right here, it's like a kind of an arrow pointing to the wall with a little bit of greenness on it. Put back in the middle, since we seem to have lost that one. Okay, I got my little pick wall tool here. I got it extending into the wall core, and let me show you what happens. When I click on the wall, if you go zooming on in there, what it's actually going to do is it's going to be smart enough to say, okay, given this wall, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put it right there at that line, at that boundary. Actually, there's two parallel lines there. They're sort of, when I zoom out, you'll see, or they're indicating the direction of the joists, the indicating of the structural direction. Okay, but if I keep on going ahead and clicking on different walls, you'll see what it's going to do is automatically choose the core. Now, every once in a while when it's doing the core, it might hit the wrong side of the core. You might get the inside versus the outside. If that happens to you, what you need to do is just choose one of those lines and flip it. Okay, you can flip it from the inside to the outside. It really depends on how your building is going to be, whether or not this is called platform framing, where it extends out between things. Sometimes we just bring it up to the inside face and we hang everything on what's called a ledger, where it just hangs off the inside of the outside wall. Okay, but in this case, we'll go ahead and extend it out to the core like that. That's going to be very common for frame construction. And as you go through and pick the walls, this is where you have to watch out. Try to close it. Every once in a while, the walls aren't quite joined up. When it picks the corners, there might be a little bit of a gap there. So you might have to give it a little help by doing some trimming at the corners, just if it didn't quite line up. But I'll finish that. Okay, and we're looking pretty good. We now have a floor. Zoom on out there. Again, we have a floor in that area. If I choose that floor, floors are kind of hard to choose actually, because in floor plan views, the edge of the floor tends to be inside the wall, which makes it hard to pick. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll pick it in 3D and then go back to 2D and kind of look at it there. But I can go ahead and change that back to a wood finish floor, whatever it is I want. You can actually see my floor kind of hanging out here a little bit because I don't have to have a very good construction detail right now. I have the floor stopping the edge of the floor. The brick's kind of just hanging out there right now. We need to put a little bit of support for that in there too. But that's kind of a pretty good starting point in terms of getting going. And so go ahead and start putting a floor under the building. See how that goes, and we'll see if, answer any questions about that. Yes?
If you were going to create a patio outside, would you also have it go into the core, or would you want it to start further back?
That we would typically start further back. Usually what happens then is it'll probably be down a few inches, like 2 or 3 inches. And then, I usually hold that back because there's almost always, you can't see that, can you? You almost always, if the concrete wall's here on the outside and you have a patio out here on the outside, you almost always want to hold a couple inches back here with some sort of expansive material, just because the two things are going to shift at different rates. And you don't want them actually to be attached to each other. So patio is almost always you hold out a little bit. Yes?
Is there a way to kind of add like a node in between the walls? We have the interior wall going to the exterior, so that if you want to have that small bedroom be a different floor, so like if you're doing the big floor first, and you're picking the walls for it to be, instead of picking that entire wall, just picks like up to the interior wall.
Yeah, no, I understand. This is sort of a really good and interesting issue, because this gets to sort of the difference between how we typically model quickly versus what we really should be doing. Okay, because there's a couple ways you can handle that, and it's this classic problem of the best way to model it, the best way from a constructability standpoint to model it is for us to actually model not the finished floor, but to only model up through the subfloor, because the subfloor would actually continue across the entire space. So actually say, don't put the finish in that floor, go ahead and just get it up to the plywood or whatever the decking is that's going to be underneath it. Okay. And then go back and add a floor within the room that has the finish. Okay. As a shortcut, what often happens is by default, we'll just sort of think of those as being the same surface. Or even what I'll sometimes do is if most of the house is wood, I'll go through and put, again, a finished floor just in the room that has the carpet to be a little bit different. But that's an inaccuracy because no one's using my model for estimating. If you really want to have a very good model, it'd be better to kind of model the finished floor separate and stuff like that. And that's the easiest way to do that, or the best way to do that. But again, a really, really good point. Because these are the sort of things we sort of struggle with right now, is now that people are using our models to actually schedule the construction and actually do the estimating, a lot of architectural shortcuts we've been using are creating inaccurate results. So better do that separately. So how you would do that even is over here on the floor, if I wanted to take that floor, and this one has the wood finish, maybe I will say duplicate this and say, really, how about just subfloor only? Okay, and now for this, I could say, okay, take the oak flooring out and just really leave it just at the plywood and the structural layer. Okay, and that would probably be the better way to model that. And then I should go at the other one just as a separate thin layer of carpeting or tile or whatever it is on top of it. Okay.
So can you add like another floors on top of that?
Yes, on top of this. Yes.
How would you?
Oh, no worries. If I want to put an, you mean just in terms of the finished floor on top of this? Yeah, no worries. Okay, what we'll do there is let's go to floor. Oh, what do we want to here? Let's see what I got here. I'm just going to do that generic one as a starting point. I will edit the type and duplicate it. Because I'm going to put in here, I'm just going to put finished floor, carpet, or something like that. Or wood, whatever it is. Okay, for the structure, this is going to be very much like editing the wall structure. I can say that, okay, it has, oh, actually it's really just a finish, isn't it? Here's what's going on. It's really going to matter. We'll choose some sort of material, go out to the materials dialog. Let's see what I got in here. I got any carpet? I got some carpet in there. Okay, if I was really good, I'd have carpeting and I've had padding, I'd add all those different things in there. Okay, and then I'll give it some, oh, not a thickness of 1, I'm gonna give it a thickness of, oh, let's say like an inch or something like that, 3/4 of an inch. Actually, I'm sort of curious about this. I'm experimenting a little bit right now, so pardon me as we mess up. Nah. I'm trying to think if we can get this right. I'll put it back in the structure. I'll leave it that. I know this will work. So basically, actually it's not a structural material. That'll be okay there. Say okay to carpet. So now what happens when I want to go ahead and place that carpet floor? Okay, let's do this. I'll be on level 1 again. Okay. What I want to do is actually, for the carpeting, I don't want to put it at level 1. I want to put it 1 inch above level 1. Yeah, I want to put, because I'm always saying what the top surface is. So 0 foot 1 is the offset. I can pick walls again, and this is one where, again, I could extend to the core. Actually, we can argue about that one in terms of whether it's really extending to the core. That has to do with whether it's hitting the sheetrock or whether it's actually hitting the studs. I'm probably off by an inch. Okay, in this case, I picked the walls. Actually, let me go over to the floor plan view. It'll be easier to see here. I used the wall picking, and the wall picking was kind of a quickie way of getting the carpeting just in that room. The problem is it's overshot. Okay, so, well, even in there, it didn't do such a good job there on the wall core there. Let me see if I can flip those. Okay, yeah, I'm overshot right now. I could just be drawing these, but what I want to do now is basically trim this. Okay, and now I'll have just carpeting in that room. Actually, let me show you another way to do that. That may be better. Now, I've been picking the wall surfaces and the core. Well, no, that's actually a good way. If you pick the core, the nice thing is if the wall moves, the carpet's going to move with it. That makes sense? The boundary, yeah. Another way to do it is we can use this little guy over here, which is just pick a line. It says not just the wall core, we can pick any surface. Like then we can pick the exterior surface, but again, we can lock the edge of the carpet to that. So again, if the wall moves, the carpet moves too. So always better to go through and get things locked together that way. So I'll say no, don't overlap that. Okay, we got carpeting there. Let's just see if this actually worked. Okay, the theory was I should be able to move that. Yep, and the carpeting moves with it. Okay, so now we got an accurate carpeting quantity, yada, yada, yada. It's all staying together if we want it that way. Okay, in our last few minutes here this morning, let me go ahead and talk about roofs a little bit. Then you can go off and play with floors and kind of see what that looks like in terms of your building. Roofs are sort of a very amazingly similar thing because it's that same sort of thing. We're going to go through, we're going to choose some sort of wall. We're also going to go ahead and probably choose the core surface or that outside surface there. One of the few things you have to worry about roofs that are a little bit different is we tend not to just have them end up here. We tend to actually have them overhang a little bit. Okay, so there's a couple different things that you need to think about relative to the roofs. One is, for that edge, is this edge, does it have an overhang? So what is that distance? Okay. The other thing you have to worry about is really with the roof is this point of connection, is it defining a slope or is it just a straight wall edge that's kind of coming up? And this has to do whether it's like a hip or a gable. And maybe it's easier to show that. But we're going to sort of think about, does the roof slope here or does the roof actually just kind of come on out as a flat roof and the wall is going to join up to it? We just have to sort of figure that out for each of the different edges. So maybe it's easiest to kind of show you how that works. Okay, here's how we're going to do that. For the roof, I'm not going to place it at level 1, although you might place it at level 1 and even move it up to level 2 later. A lot of times we do that by accident. It's okay, roofs just sort of like floors are hosted on a level and you can move them. That's okay. But I'm going to go to level 2. In level 2, you will see that Level 1 is still there. It's kind of ghosty though, and that's kind of indicating that it's on the level below. It's not actually sort of poking up here. If these walls actually poked up, then they'd be darker. You'd actually sort of see them in the native color as opposed to the underlay color. But roofs look like this, right near floors. We'll go ahead and do that same sort of thing. We'll go through and choose a drawing tool. And I could just really draw edges, but I'm going to recommend as a starting point, try this pick a wall tool. Go for that one. That's actually sort of the best way to think about it. Okay. Next up, we have the issue of should those extend into the wall core? That is, as we're measuring, do we want to be measuring the overhang from the face of the stud or from the face of the finish? And again, by convention, we tend to do that by the face of the stud, because what will happen is, even when the carpenter's out there framing, they'll be measuring, the studs will be there, but the finish may not be there yet. So measuring to the face of the stud, sort of a clearer way to do it. Okay. Then you have the question of overhang, how big that should be. And this is really kind of an interesting thing. Depending upon your house and your architectural style, it can be all over the place. Okay, in a lot of little ranch houses, this is often like 16 to 18 inches. Okay, if you go back to prairie school architecture, this thing got to be 36 inches or even 48 inches. They got to be very, very big. It's really more just an architectural style thing about really how far you want that to be. Functionally, what the overhang is doing is protecting the walls and the windows, so if rain comes down, it's not hitting that. It's providing a little bit of protection. It's also providing some sun protection. So you could put a very big overhang, for example, if you are building something, like a sloping roof like this, okay, and the southern sun is over here and it's kind of coming on down. If you want to go through and protect these windows, so during the winter or during the summertime, sun's not coming through the windows, okay, what you might go ahead and do is put a big overhang on that one side, okay, just to shield and shade those windows, as opposed to during the summertime, the sun can come in and kind of hit the window, or wintertime it can come in, summertime you're trying to block it. So think about, overhangs have a purpose in terms of what's going on. Sometimes they're even, they don't have to be even in terms of what's going on. But as we start thinking about, putting the roof on here in the architectural style, I'm going to put a 2-foot overhang on here, just kind of an in-between one. And what I'm going to do is start picking walls. Now, as you pick walls, there's this notion of, does the wall define slope or not? And let's start by having them all define slope, and then we'll turn that off and try it a little bit differently. If I choose this wall, and there's that 2-foot overhang, notice on each of the different walls there, we're actually getting this little triangle, this little sloping triangle, and that's going to indicate the slope of the wall, or that this one's sloping up. Okay, and again, this is sort of a pink line sketching mode, so we have to have a continuous boundary in terms of making that work. Okay, you might have to trim them if you need to. The slope right now is uniform. It doesn't have to be uniform. We can control it on all sides independently. If you want a uniform slope, 9-12, 9 inches of rise every 12 inches of run is a very steep roof. That's sort of more eastern, snow shedding off it, where you're trying to make a very big architectural statement that says, I have a big roof. Out here, it's much more common 4-12, 5-12, more modern things tend to have shallower slopes. I'm going to make it 5-12. That's kind of sort of a ranch house average. And when we are ready for all this, we can even choose a roof type. There's generic. I'll do a wood rafter with asphalt shingles. Okay, same sort of things. Choose the boundary, choose the type, sort of draw the boundary, and then finish it. That's kind of your big way of operating. So I'll say finish it. And if it's cohesive, it'll come through and actually create a roof for you. Now, again, this roof looks pretty good in terms of what's going on. It did all the hard math. It figured out that given this 5-12 slope, and I come up from all the edges, that it should come out and form this sort of triangulating surface. It figures out where all the ridge, the valley, all those things. Great news. That's actually good. It does that. It used to be one of the hard parts, is trying to do stuff like that. And the nice thing about this is, because it's attached to the roof like that, or attached to the walls, if I go through and move the wall, and go back to that 3D view, hopefully the roof caught up with it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So the nice thing is we're starting to have a pretty nice little parametric structure where based on the walls, the floors hang to the walls, the windows are kind of nicely spacing based on certain differences, the roof is hanging to the walls. So we start to have a little bit of a stretchy thing that has some flexibility to it that's always going to stay relatively cohesive. And we want that. We never want to move a wall and have a big hole in the building. We want it to always sort of be consistent. So if you do need to move that 2 feet, like minutes before you have to submit the drawings, you have something that's at least relatively cohesive. Now, this sloping roof from all sides, that isn't the only story, so I'm going to give you that little variation on that just before you leave. And that is as follows, that for this roofing, in the same way we could edit the boundary of the floor, we can also edit the footprint of the roof. And if you choose to do that, okay, you can see here's the pink line mode. You can actually determine which sides want to slope and which ones don't. So right now I've selected this end wall here. It says defines roof slope. Let me turn that off. How about on this one over here? I'll do this one over here. Again, I'll turn the sloping off on that. Okay, architecturally we'd call that a gable roof as opposed to a hip roof, hip being coming up from all sides. Now we're going to have a couple gables on it. When I say finish, you see I get something that looks more like this. Okay, and you can experiment with all sorts of variations. Just try different things and see what you come up with. You can make a completely flat roof. You can have something that slopes up from one side. You can have something that slopes up from two sides. You just kind of choose which ones you do. And generally, it'll do a pretty good job of creating the roofs. Now, just to finish off, give you something to sort of play with between sessions. Another thing that works, though, is you might notice this. I got my walls, they were looking pretty good. I got my roof, it's looking pretty good. I have this little bit of space where birds are flying in the house, and that's not so good in terms of what's going on. So I got a little gap in there. And you're thinking, okay, well, I got that there. I can go to the elevation, and I can start messing with a wall. I can do what I need to kind of fill in that gap. It sounds like a lot of work. To kind of fill in that little triangle and kind of make the wall happen, do all those sorts of things. And if you think about how everything else works in Revit, if there's the notion that really that wall should always be able to attach to that roof, the way we're attaching other things, you might want a tool that helps you do that. And there actually is one, and it looks like this. If I come over here, and I say that that's the wall, one of the different wall modification options is this notion of attaching the top of the wall to something else. So we can attach walls to roofs. And the nice thing about doing that, let me attach this top. So there. It'll go ahead and figure out what it needs to do. Kind of fill in the gap for us. That's looking pretty good. The nice thing about attaching the walls to the roof is I keep on stressing this funny thing about how everything flexes nicely. So if I change the slope of that roof to 10 inches, I go ahead and decide I really want that big old roof. Okay. It does that for you. It fills it in nicely. Or the other thing is, even for something like this, let me say I decide that I got really, really rich and I want to go through and have that lakefront view, and I change that to a wall of glass windows. Let's go ahead and do this. It's going to complain a little bit because it's going to get rid of some windows along the way. But let's see if it'll do it. Come on, do your thing.
So I've got a question.
Yes.
For some reason, it wasn't doing it yesterday, but when I choose the big boundaries, that the boundaries doesn't close, it's stayed open. And it's all there. So it won't be able to close.
Yes. Okay, so to do that, what we should do is use the trim tool. What you do is go to this green tab here that says modify there. Now, one small, okay, and then use the trim tool. Insisting closing not.
Yeah, but shouldn't do it manually.
I think it should go ahead and close it on an actual. Did you do pink walls or did you do pink lines? That one there?
Yeah.
We'll have to look at it and see what's going on. It should, I would think.
It was doing it yesterday.
Am I connected?
Yeah, I don't know. But if you're gonna watch, but if you do right, what you think should happen is what's next.
Click
And
that
I'm
one.
not sure what turned it off this time. Okay, so now we have, again, my little lakefront house. Everything's looking good. Same sort of thing. The nice thing about the roof is if I change that, again, to make it different, I'll make it 8 and 12, whatever it is. Okay, the roof will adapt itself accordingly. So let's go ahead and adjourn with that right now. Relative to thinking about the assignment, stuff like that, if you can be playing around with your basic little structure and kind of thinking about getting a floor, get a roof under there, maybe if you want to have some like sidewalks or some patios or something like that around the structure, get some of those in. See if you can sort of take that and kind of just kind of push your design a little bit, get some stuff done so that when we come back together after lunchtime, we could actually start looking at, well, we'll put some fixtures into it, but I want to like talk to you about this whole notion of getting them on sheets and how we get your views into sort of a form that looks like plans that go together on sheets that you'll submit. Okay, so if you can, go ahead and work on that a little bit between now and, when are we? 1 o'clock, that'd be fantastic. Okay, thank you.